There is much more to Hyderabad than the wafting fragrance of its iconic biryani, its Dakkhani cadence, and the once fabled riches of the Nizam. The 430-year-old city has seen a great deal of history and traveled through 4 centuries of tumult to emerge as one of India's two defining information technology hubs, along with Bengaluru in the last 3 decades. Tracing the remarkable story of Hyderabad with the express purpose of breaking the biryani stereotype is journalist and writer Dr. Dinesh Sharma's book, Beyond Biriyani, The Making of a Globalized Hyderabad, published by Westland Books. The book places Hyderabad within a unique ecosystem that Dr. Sharma argues has been responsible for its rise both as a thriving IT as well as biotech nerve center of India. He spoke to Mayank Chhaya Reports from New Delhi. Welcome to Mayank Chhaya Reports, Dinesh. It's a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure too.
And congratulations on your book. I've just begun reading some excerpts. I was struck by something what you write early on. It's an interesting story about Ibrahim Quli, who ascended to the throne of Golconda in 1550, who built a bridge essentially to facilitate his son's amours with a girl, dancing girl, in a place called Chichlam, right? Chichlam, am I pronouncing it right?
Yeah, that's right.
So essentially, Hyderabad began with a princess affair with a dancing girl in a broad way of speaking. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, that's the story every Hyderabadi has grown up with. It's a part of folklore in Hyderabad. And often we have heard that story, and it's also there in some books. But historians do give that story a bit of a discount in the sense that, this whole notion that this lady was a Hindu girl and the rulers were Shia, and he did marry Bagmati.
Right.
And the controversy is that whether the city was named Bhagyanagar after her or not. So, but I'll not get into that, and that's something which is still being debated in Hyderabad. But certainly, that's a foundation of the that goes into the foundation of city. And as I mentioned briefly in the introduction, that the Qutub Shahs were the rulers of Golconda, and
Right.
then when that city got congested, they wanted to found a new city, and that's how Hyderabad was founded. Some now 430 years old, Hyderabad. Yeah. So
If you
and
if you're talking about 1550 as the Golconda throne, next year you celebrate 475 years generally of that, right?
yeah, they were the rulers of Golconda, but the city was founded later when he
Okay.
became the king, and then he founded the city. He was visiting this place through this bridge when the bridge was constructed and all that. That's how the oldest bridge of Hyderabad. So that's part of the folklore. But
Right.
the Hyderabad city, as we know today, was founded some 430 years ago when Qutub Shah Kuli Qutub became the king. And
It,
there was also another story about see, Charminar is as old. I mean, that's one connect everybody has is about Hyderabad is Charminar. So Charminar is also as old as the city itself because that was the starting point where the foundation of the city was laid, and it was developed around that. That was supposed to be a civic center, so to say, and that's how a modern city came up when the capital moved from Golconda to Hyderabad. That's the
right.
historical part of it. But my idea was that not get into the political history and the history per se,
Right.
but look at how modern Hyderabad developed, so to say. And that's where I begin. I begin with all these stories, but I then get into
Right.
the story of the development of the city as what we see today. Very often we forget that, what we see today has connections to the past. And history is not enclosed and it's dead and gone, but there is a continuity. There are strands that connect the present to the past. So that was my idea
Right.
when I started writing this book.
I'm glad you mentioned the Charminar. It's amazing how so many great cities have begun primarily with one man's hubris. You talk about Muhammad Quli's Prime Minister Mir Muhammad Astarabadi, who was sort of an Iranian architect in a
Yeah.
sense. He was the one who designed the Charminar, and Charminar is still the iconic
Yes.
presence in Hyderabad. So I mean, it strikes me. Great cities across the world have essentially begun with one man's hubris, and it's true equally of Hyderabad.
True, absolutely. And also this idea that you should develop a new city. I mean, they didn't come, Qutub Shahs didn't come when the city was built, they were already there. But the whole plan that we should have a new city and plan it in such a way that everything is neat and clean, because Golconda was getting congested and there were diseases and things like that. So the whole idea was to move to a place which is virgin, where you could develop everything, in a planned way.
Right.
And that's how Charminar and four, you know, ways going across these in the four directions were built. They were all, for a long time. It was one of the. It was a medieval city though, but yeah, it was a concept of town planning. I would say came were applied, some of those principles, not only just the grand buildings, but the utility of those
Right.
buildings, planning of those buildings. There was a hospital built nearby, there were sarais, there were shopping arcades, there were people, areas for people to live. So it was a an effort towards a planned development at some 4 decades, 4 centuries back. So
Right.
that was a kind of a departure, I would say, because later on, when we see how the city developed, when the Asaf came, this again the same problem came, that the new city became congested,
Right.
but there was not much of a planning for at least 2 centuries after that, and the structures and the city developed around palaces and all those grand structures rather
Yeah.
than keeping the utility part in mind, and that changed in the early part of the 20th century, so to say, after the flood, which I
Right.
have argued that was a turning point in the building of modern Hyderabad. The flood in Musi in 1908,
Right.
that was a turning point when new ideas started arriving. My whole endeavor, I think, in this book was that not to just tell the story per se, but also to look at the processes which went behind certain developments. How did the ideas come, and who were the people who brought those ideas into Hyderabad?
Right.
In the say mid 19th and early 20th century, that laid the foundation of so-called modern Hyderabad at that point. So where did those ideas come from, and who
Right.
were the people behind this, and what were the processes? I think that's what I've tried to. Otherwise, you know, I'm not a trained historian, so to
Right.
say, but my interest since I was born and brought up and educated in Hyderabad, and I had a connect with some of those things which I described. But when you are growing up, you don't pay attention to what happened and how did things happen. You just look at them and you forget about them. But when I started looking as a writer, then I wanted to go into those processes and how things developed, and how, who were the people and how did these so-called new ideas come in, because
Right.
it was a medieval, it was a Kasi Mughlai system. The Asif Jahs, Qutub Shahs were followed by Asif Jahs, who ruled for 200 odd years. So they kind of were pretty much like the old system of Mughals administration. But how did that change? Who brought those new ideas, and what were those influences, so to say?
Right. Right. The coolies were, to digress a bit, the coolies were
Yeah.
Shia, as you mentioned, who are still a minority within Islam, and I'm sure they were even more so in those years. How did that dynamic work within the context of Golconda? Because I'm sure the Muslims there were largely Sunni, right?
Yeah, there was, but in fact, Shias were there, but we know that they were very liberal in the sense that in the administration there were Hindus as well as Sunnis in the administration. The wazirs and the prime ministers of the Shia rulers were there, and they never tried to impose their religion per se. And in fact, that has been a big cultural factor in the hinterland Telangana. I mean, the present day Telangana was largely the area which the Qutub Shahs ruled, and there were extended areas in Maharashtra, the present day Maharashtra and other places, but it was largely the Telangana area. So that cultural impact of the rulers being from a different religion was never taken in a different, in a very any hostile way as such, and because
Right.
these rulers were very enlightened, they were poets, they wrote poetry in Telugu, and that's where the Dakkhani language, which we know, kind of emanated and flourished, and many of them were poets, and they were very liberal and they promoted arts. So I don't think religion, there being Shia, was a major factor, but yes, it had a cultural influence, like even in villages dominated by Hindus. I think I mentioned it somewhere that Shia festivities are observed. It's
Right.
called Pirula Panduga, the festival of the Pirs. The Muharram and Taziyas are
Right.
taken off
Right.
even in Hindu villages. So it had a huge cultural impact, and there were also Sufis in many ways. There were several Sufi saints, and in their poetry, of course, they were all talking of Sufism. So that the majority not being Shias didn't really lead to any kind of a different situation which one would expect. And Asaf Jahs were Sunnis, but again, many of their wazirs were prime ministers, and the nobility belonged to the Shia sector as well. So that syncretic culture kind of a thing continued during the Asaf Jah's rules also.
I see.
And in fact, the mother of the last Nizam was a Shia. So this man respected the other sect as well. So there was no hostility even during the Asif Jahs when the Sunnis were in the ruling class.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Just
that I think lays a very huge impact of when we say Hyderabad as a Ganga Jamni culture, and that is where the roots lie. It goes back to the Qutub Shahi period and then continues with Asif Jah. So that syncretic culture of respecting languages, multiculturalism, multi-language, being kind
right.
of looked at uh, evenly with by the ruler. So that continues. So that's what I think really defines the Hyderabadi culture.
Okay. Just the last couple of things on this particular theme. Both Ibrahim and his son were married respectively to Hindu women Bhagirathi and Bhagmati, as you mentioned. Did you come across literature which mentions how that might have influenced the way they ruled? The fact that they had Hindu wives?
Uh,
I mean,
no, as I
I know
said,
it's not part of the theme of your
I
book, but I'm
know.
just curious.
No, other scholars have gone into this, and in fact, one of the books which I cite is on the Bhagnagar and Golconda, very
Right.
well researched book, which goes into the cultural factors and how did it affect their, administration. But they were all the religions, whether it is Hinduism or the majority, the ruled were all Hindus, most of them, and Sunnis, but that didn't reflect, you know, the administration part. As I said, there were people from different religions. They respected, other languages. They themselves wrote in Telugu, the language, and they adopted this Dakkhani, which sort of flourished during the Qutub Shahi. So I think it didn't really matter whether they were the dominant religion was Shia because it was the ruling class.
I see. Now, coming to the core of what you write about, I'm curious how the Hyderabad is, which you are one of them as well. How do they look at the biryani being the stereotype of Hyderabad? Are they happy with it, or they are just now dismissive that that's all you think about when you think of Hyderabad?
Yeah, because one of the reasons of calling the book Beyond Biryani
Yeah,
was that the immediate recall you have is the Charminar and Biryani and a few other monuments. And of course, I mean, personally, I would feel it's a bit overhyped. but people enjoy in the sense, okay, they enjoy the fame being attached with biryani, and one of the largest chains is based in Hyderabad, the Paradise Biryani, which started as a canteen in a cinema hall, and now it's a multi-billion dollar
Right.
biryani vending company. So yeah, they do enjoy, but they sometimes feel bad that okay, there's a lot more to Hyderabad than just biryani. Even if you look at the cuisine itself, there's a whole variety of cuisine which people want to talk about. But yeah, somehow that has got stuck to it. So the idea was that let's look beyond biryani, but it's a good recall and connect for people outside Hyderabad, I would say.
Right. You know,
And it
the
has become a pan-India phenomenon if you look at the numbers of chains which have come up in different parts of the country. So yeah, and one of the cultural factors which brings outsiders and lets them assimilate in Hyderabad is biryani. So that's a
true.
binder, I would say.
And biryani is eaten quite widely here where I am. So a lot of
Yeah,
people
of
they
course.
know that just as they know chicken tikka, they know biryani as
Yes,
well. It's become sort of the emblematic
yes.
of some of the Indian food. Hyderabad as a globalized city is about, I would say, 30, 35 years old phenomenon. And at the heart of it is the IT revolution, something that you have tracked, I have tracked. Uh, how do you tell me a bit about it? Why is it that although a lot of other cities, as you write, tried that, it's essentially Bangalore and Hyderabad managed to create a whole ecology, and Hyderabad even more so now. So tell me a bit about it. How did that come to be?
No, yeah, as you rightly said that the inflection point or the exponential growth happened in the IT sector in the past 30 years, and rightly so, people ascribe it to the liberalization. Post 91 developments and things started, Western companies were also forced to look outside,
Right,
cost cutting and globalization, and the telecommunication became feasible, so it was easy for data transfer, and all those factors came in a big way. But what I argue and what I have tried to prove in this book is that the stage was set in 91, but the fact it was a multiple positive factors existed before that. They
right,
couldn't have been just brought to fruition just with the process of liberalization. And liberalization happened all over, but only few cities could benefit out of it because of the factors, the underlying factors. And that's why I tried to look at the. Of course, I started with 91, but then story kept going back and back and back. So then I thought, let me look at how did when we talk about in Hyderabad, of course, it is not just IT, but also biotechnology and the, vaccine manufacturing and the pharmaceutical sector is in a big way. So how did these two sectors develop? So then I started looking at the knowledge institutions. So how did, because skills, knowledge creation is one of the factors for any cluster to develop. It cannot happen just because of policies or just because some people are interested in promoting a city. A lot of politicians today talk of promoting Silicon Valleys all over, but it's not possible to do that. So what were those factors? So then I started looking at the knowledge institutions, and that's where I come across that these institutions were founded in early part of the 20th century. They flourished over a period of time. They created a culture of doing research. They created a culture of doing industrial production that developed a lot of skills. Not only the, say, Osmania University or the industrial lab, which became a regional research laboratory later under CSIR, but also public sector companies like IDPL, like
right,
CMC, Computer Maintenance Corporation, like ECIL, Electronics Corporation of India Limited. They developed the ecosystem. It was not by design that, okay, we'll do that and somebody will come and benefit out of it, but it happened organically. Why,
right,
why did PSUs, why were PSUs set up in Hyderabad? Because the governments felt that it had lagged, it had missed the kind of development while it was a part of the Nizam state till 1948. So it needed some extra push. and
Right.
industries were dispersed as part of the regional development, and all those factors came into play. But what happened with these public sectors? Sometimes what people do is they look at the public sectors and say that they are a failure because ECL didn't make money, it is of no use. Because IDPL ran into losses, so it is of no use, it didn't contribute. But the contribution of these two companies, particularly in the context of Hyderabad, was to develop a critical mass of trained manpower,
Absolutely.
an
Absolutely.
ecosystem, because ECIL promoted a lot of ancillary industries which got into manufacturing, which got into software writing. IDPL developed a lot of,
Right.
chemical industry, pharmaceutical related industries. So these two factors, the availability of an educational institution like Usmania University, and then a few others, and the presence of these two or three or four public sector undertakings, which developed an ecosystem, which led to entrepreneurship when the private entrepreneurs came out to take advantage of the liberalization. It was primed. The situation was primed, I would say.
Right.
So they, move ahead later on. In fact, the trajectory between Hyderabad and Bangalore is almost similar, but there are some dissimilarities, but largely it is similar, I would say.
Interesting you should mention it because in that sense, you're saying that without the institutional ecosystem, this model is not replicable in other cities. But at the same time, a city like Ahmedabad, for instance, where I come from, it has had a long history of great institutions, be it the Physical Research Laboratory, be it School of Architecture, National
True.
Institute of Design, and of course the IIM. And despite that, it didn't rise up to the level of these two cities. In fact, nowhere close, perhaps because it's been a mercantile city for hundreds of years. How do you look at this contradiction between cities in India?
In fact, it's interesting that when we look at, say, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Baroda, Ahmedabad, they are all ex-princely states. They all
Right.
had good education institutions. In fact, Baroda was much ahead in terms of industrialization. They
Indeed.
gave
Yeah.
incentives to private sector to start industries, the princely state. So, of course, Baroda and the region which you are referring to, Ahmedabad, moved ahead in manufacturing. That's how the first lot of pharmaceutical industry came up in that region, and that spilled over to Bombay also. So it's not as if those investments during the princely period did not lead to any industrial development. They did, but if you're looking at only at IT, in fact, it's an
Yeah.
interesting example that when the software technology parks were set up, one was set up in Gandhinagar also, and another
Right.
in Bhubaneswar, and Hyderabad and Bangalore, all at the same time. But yeah, there were other factors. For example, since I have studied Hyderabad in great detail, see, while all these factors are there, till mid 1990s, till Chandrababu Naidu became the chief minister, the industry was fledgling. Yeah, there were no big IT companies in Hyderabad, despite all the positive factors. So you needed that push from the policy side. And that is what happened with the political leadership. That's what differentiates Hyderabad, say, from Ahmedabad, or say
Right.
from Bhubaneswar, or even Travancore, which is again a princely state, similar trajectory. But with this political push to implement the agenda of liberalization and globalization was the main plank which Chandrababu Naidu did. So he couldn't have managed without all other factors like the PSU, their skills, and the ecosystem of entrepreneurs, the capital moved from Andhra side to Telangana to Hyderabad, the agriculture surpluses from Andhra, they were invested in the engineering colleges first and then into the IT industry later. So all those were factors were there, but still there were no big names, so to say, whereas
Right.
Bangalore had. So that's where the political push comes in, which I have kind
True.
of in detail I have mentioned that how did that happen?
Yeah. Interesting you should mention Chandrababu Naidu because, funnily enough, you remember, I remember we are that vintage. He was considered the most tech savvy chief minister. Why? Because he could use the PowerPoint. I
Okay.
mean, people were floored by a simple
Yes.
fact that Chandrababu Naidu could operate PowerPoint presentation. How far have we traveled from there? It's funny now.
Yeah, because see, that was the time, if you remember, there were other chief ministers like Lalu Prasad who was saying, "ये IT वाईटी क्या है?
हाँ,
IT से
absolutely.
computer तो दूध नहीं देता." No, that was a famous dialogue.
G
So
G.
at the time when we had the political class talking such things, you had a chief minister who styled himself as the CEO and started using the PowerPoint. In fact, it was all, as I find and detail in the book, it was all a part of a strategy, and he had a good set of advisors. That's what I tried to look at. How did those ideas come into his mind? Of course, he had a vision, but he needed people to implement those ideas. And how did those ideas were implemented? Who were the people? So there was a set of advisors, there was a set of IS people, there was a set of consultants from McKinsey. So all this was very, carefully planned. That when you meet Bill Gates, that meeting was itself was it happened in a dramatic way. The first
Right.
meeting, that he should use the same kind of a computer, which I think it was compact at that time, which Gates uses, and also he should use PPT so that he gets an impress that a politician from a place from South India is using two of the same products which I'm using. So it was a cleverly crafted strategy. That's where I think must give due credit to him that he hastened that process. I'm not saying that Hyderabad would not have become what it is today. It would have taken longer. He kind of
Right.
hastened that process. He deliberately went out of his way to attend, say, Davos, then to wherever he went. He came to NASCOM, he went everywhere. He went on a road show to US, he came to San Jose, everywhere. And
Right.
he tried to impress, so because he has mentioned that my strategy was that I should meet a particular CEO not when he comes visiting me, but I should go and see in his place, his city
Right.
or his country. That would impress him. So it was, I think, very minutely crafted strategy to attract these people. And some of them, once you get a big name like Microsoft or Dell, then people would think, okay, something they must have done right in the research that they have chosen this place, and that's how the exponential growth happened post 2000. So that's where the political part comes into play, and which was very cleverly played. Then also he had an advantage that he was part of the coalition government at the center, so he didn't have any problem in accessing the visiting leaders or even getting himself included in some of these deliberations or going on a bilateral visit to say Japan or Malaysia. He didn't face any of those problems. It was a smooth sailing for him because of the he was part of the coalition at the center. So
Right.
things worked in his favor. Multiple factors, I would say.
We are now
That
at another inflection
kind of
point, Dinesh, and I, of course, refer to the rise of AI. Do you see a city in India, apart from, of course, the two predictable ones, Bangalore and Hyderabad, and perhaps in some ways Pune? Are there any places which might be able to run with AI quicker than the established centers like Hyderabad and Bangalore? Or you think because these two cities already have the foundation of the IT, they might be able to build it quicker than others?
No, I think certainly that's an advantage because for any new technology based business, whether it is AI or anything, you need a certain ecosystem, where people can thrive. For example, if I start a company, of course, others are trying to catch up in, say, Indore, Pune. There is a sizable number of companies. Why do people move to these places like Hyderabad or Bangalore or even NCR, which is a huge
Right.
technology business in Gurgaon and Noida? Because there is a room for mobility. There's a room for people to move among other companies. So that's part of the ecosystem. The ideas flow. One company depends on another. They get things done. So certainly, whenever we are talking of a new line of business, for example, AI, the existing cities, existing players will certainly have an upper hand. But some of the back end of AI, I believe, is moving to tier two and tier three cities. Some recent reports say that, in fact, a lot of AI which you see in developed markets, and that the back end is being done, which is again a labor intensive work. So that kind of work might, for example, if you are designing a driverless car, so you need to annotate those visuals. I think it's quite a labor intensive work. Or if you're designing an AI system for a say a store uh, where different things are placed in a in a shopping mall, and people, you study the people's behavior. So these people are given the videos and then they annotate. So actually AI is fed with lot of information which is culled or annotated physically. So that kind of a labor intensive work has started moving to labor and in tier two and tier three cities. There are companies in Maso, there are companies in smaller cities, which is again like your BPO operation. Instead of
Right.
doing a call center work, these guys are doing this. So yeah, but not the high end. High end will still happen in Bangalore and Hyderabad and
I
Noida
see.
or Gurgaon. I would say yes, because it needs certain uh, a framework to operate. You need venture capital, you need people to collaborate with, you need the talent, which can happen only in a tech cluster,
Right.
existing tech cluster, and certainly these cities will have an advantage over it.
I want to conclude on a slightly different note, which is not directly connected with the theme of your book. You mentioned AI and labor intensive work going to smaller places. Why is it that after 30 years, India still focuses on grunt work, as it were? We have still not done anything which is past breaking in terms of IT and AI. We can't even begin to think as yet. Why is it that we are so content with grunt labor intensive work even now after 30 years of IT revolution?
No, I think you're right in a way, and you're not right in another way, because see, there's a spectrum. It's not as if bulk of the work is happening at that level. People have moved up now. We do a lot in engineering R&D. We do a lot in the product development. For example, when they say the so-called global capability centers are located, some 600 or 700 in Bangalore and 400 in Hyderabad. So they are doing high-end work, but dedicatedly for the corporations with which they are attached. For example, a big manufacturing firm in Europe will have their capability center here, which is developing product for them. Or, for example, a lot of pharma companies, big pharma companies have set up their global capability centers in Hyderabad. So they are developing products. So a lot of product development is happening, which is very high-end work and which is connected to the global chain of these corporations. So we may not be able to capitalize on the IPR of those products, but that is happening on the Indian soil by Indian mind, so to say. So we have moved up the value chain from say BPOs to low end work, and so that has happened. But yeah, at the same time, the availability of workforce will have advantages in terms of for companies to come and do the low end work here. So that's also happening. But at a high end work, we have this outsourced R&D and stuff like that. And don't forget that one of the biggest IT product, the UPI, came out of India. So and
That's
that's
true.
a kind of a revolutionary in the sense of its applicability and the sense of the how fast it has changed the financial
Yeah, that's a huge accomplishment. Yeah.
market. So yeah, we need more of that. In fact, yeah, and people have started, and the startups are working on products specific to India. So that's happening. But yeah, if you're saying that is there a Indian product that has gone global yet? Not yet. So, but
Okay.
yeah, it's happening. India is a big enough market, so people, if they can reach 10
Yeah, I
million
think
customers,
in a way it
yeah,
goes against us in terms of innovation for the international market.
yes.
Yeah. No, good. I'm glad your book is out, and how is it doing?
Yeah, I think the initial has been out just for 15 days, and I got some good
Yeah.
reports, and
Oh, wonderful.
that's a good word, I suppose. And I'll be going to Hyderabad and talking about it.
Oh,
So I would
terrific.
say it's a kind of a myth buster. A lot of people have myths कि भाई ऐसा हुआ था. So I
हाँ
have to convince people कि ऐसे नहीं हुआ था, अलग तरीके से हुआ.